Welcome to the Drawing Room Detectives, where timeless mysteries unfold in the style of Agatha Christie's legendary sleuth. In this Hercule Poirot story, a priceless Stradivarius disappears on the eve of a world-class violin competition, and the prodigy meant to perform with it is found unconscious. Is it simple theft, sabotage, or something far more personal? Chapter 1. The Final Rehearsal. There are few things Hercule Poirot enjoys more than precision, and it was therefore no surprise to me when he accepted an invitation to attend the Royal Conservatoire of London's International Violin Competition, an event renowned not only for its virtuosity, but its rigid adherence to punctuality, etiquette, and refined order. The invitation had arrived in a thick ivory envelope embossed with a golden lyre and sealed with scarlet wax. Inside, a handwritten note from the director himself, Mr. Edwin Greaves, personally requested Poirot's presence as a guest of honour during the final round of the competition. "I imagine they're hoping you'll lend a little celebrity to their programme," I remarked over breakfast, as Poirot carefully arranged the edge of his toast on the plate. Poirot dabbed at his mouth with a linen napkin and gave one of his modest, self-satisfied nods. "Mais non, mon ami, not celebrity, gravitas, prestige. That is what they seek. Besides, it has been some time since I indulged in the subtleties of the violin." I raised an eyebrow. "You play, do you?" "I appreciate," he corrected me, tapping his temple. "I leave the playing to those with calluses and humility." By the following afternoon we had arrived at the Conservatoire, a stately building nestled in one of London's quieter corners, its Georgian columns and stone balustrades looming with practised elegance. Inside, the air held the soft scent of varnished wood, old sheet music, and the faintest trace of lavender polish. Everything gleamed. We were greeted by Mr. Greaves, a tall, rigid man with greying temples, and the voice of someone who had spent a lifetime speaking just above the orchestra. "Poirot, an honour, and you must be Captain Hastings," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "Welcome to the final day of rehearsal. You'll find the atmosphere today electric." The main auditorium was an architectural marvel, arched ceilings, carved mahogany panels, and the reverent hush of anticipation. It could seat 500, but for rehearsal it was mostly empty, save for a few professors, patrons, and competition staff. On stage, a boy was adjusting the shoulder rest on a violin. He couldn't have been older than 16. His figure was slight, with dark hair combed carefully behind his ears and fingers that hovered over the instrument with reverent familiarity. A hush fell over the space as he raised the bow. What followed could only be described as transcendent. The sound that emerged from that violin was not mere performance, it was possession. Every note shimmered, deliberate yet effortless, as though he wasn't drawing the music from the instrument, but revealing something it had always been meant to say. When he finished, there was a stunned silence before a ripple of applause scattered across the room. "Who is he?" Poirot asked, eyes wide. "Leo Varga," Greaves whispered. "Hungarian, a prodigy. This is his first time competing at the international level. He's playing the Cavali Stradivarius, a recent acquisition of the Conservatoire. It was recently restored after decades in private storage." Poirot's gaze snapped to the glass display case set just off stage. The violin inside glowed under spotlight, its amber wood almost golden, the scroll carved with a distinct flourish. A small plaque beneath it read, "Stradivarius, circa 1712. Once owned by Maestro Giovanni del Cavali." "I've heard of it," Poirot murmured. "There is a story attached, no?" Greaves hesitated. "Some call it cursed. I call it overhyped. A legacy piece. The winner tomorrow night will have the honour of performing with it before it returns to secure display." We stayed for the rest of the rehearsal, observing the other finalists. One stood out in particular, Julian Vance, a tall, handsome Brit with dramatic flair and the posture of a man who had practiced applause more than arpeggios. His performance was fiery and bold, his showmanship undeniable, but lacking the quiet command of young Varga. When Vance left the stage, he offered Leo a smirk that teetered between admiration and disdain. "Those two do not like each other," I muttered. Poirot nodded. "It is to be expected. They are not simply competitors, they are mirrors. And a mirror does not always flatter." At the reception following rehearsal, we mingled with instructors, patrons, and a few scattered family members. The conservatoire's halls glowed with polish and wealth, but beneath the elegance I sensed a different current. Quiet rivalries, furtive glances, whispered critiques. Leo sat by himself in a corner, cradling his violin case like a lifeline. He nodded politely when I introduced myself, but said little. Poirot, as always, watched everything, especially Julian Vance, who stood beneath a portrait of Tchaikovsky and held court with a glass of champagne. "Look at him," I whispered. "He already thinks he's won." "Perhaps," Poirot said, narrowing his eyes. "Or perhaps he knows he cannot." As we prepared to leave, a nervous young attendant approached Greaves and whispered something into his ear. Greaves stiffened. "What is it?" Poirot asked sharply. "The Del Cavali," Greaves said, his voice hollow. "It's gone." Chapter 2, The Vanishing Violin. The word hung in the air like a wrong note. "Gone?" Poirot repeated, eyebrows arching toward his hairline. "What do you mean, monsieur, it is gone?" Greaves swallowed visibly and lowered his voice. "The Del Cavali Stradivarius. It was removed from the display case sometime between midnight and this morning. No signs of a break-in, no alarms triggered. The case was simply opened." Poirot glanced at the young attendant, who hovered beside us like a shadow. "Where was the violin stored?" "In the security cabinet backstage," Greaves replied. "We keep it under lock and key between rehearsals, with a biometric scanner and a mechanical combination. The case itself is custom, pressure-locked, humidity-controlled." "And the last person to access it?" Greaves hesitated. "Leo Varga's instructor, Maestro Altman, returned the violin after the rehearsal ended yesterday evening. That was just after 6. Our security logs show no further access, but this morning at 8, when the assistant curator went to check the case, it was empty." Poirot tapped his chin. "Most intriguing. Was the room locked?" "Completely. Only 5 people have the necessary credentials to access the area. Myself, Altman, our head of security, the conservatory's technician, and the competition coordinator." "I assume you have questioned them?" Greaves stiffened. "Briefly. The situation has only just been discovered." Poirot turned to me. "Hastings, we are witnessing a mystery in its infancy. How refreshing." "Hardly refreshing," I muttered. "It's a catastrophe." Poirot's eyes sparkled. "Catastrophes, mon ami, are merely puzzles with dramatic flair." Within minutes, we were escorted to the backstage wing where the missing violin had last been seen. The room was small, lined with instruments in climate-controlled lockers and storage drawers. At the far end stood the now empty case, its lid gaping open like a silent accusation. Poirot leaned in to examine it, his breath fogging the glass slightly. He pulled a small handkerchief from his pocket and dabbed at the rim delicately. "No broken latch," he murmured. "No scratches around the lock. No tool marks. Most curious." I moved beside him. "You think it was someone with authorized access? But of course, to remove the violin so cleanly, so silently, this was not an opportunist. This was someone with familiarity and confidence." Greaves motioned toward the security technician, who stood nearby looking flushed and anxious. "Martin, show Monsieur Poirot the footage." The technician, Martin Peel, according to his badge, nodded and led us to a wall-mounted monitor. He rewound to the late hours of the previous night. The footage showed precisely what Greaves had said, Maestro Altman returning the violin to the case at 6:09 p.m., then locking it. After that, the room remained untouched. No movement, no shadows, no visitors. At 7:58 the next morning, the assistant curator entered, opened the lid, and discovered the violin was gone. Poirot watched the screen in silence. "May I see the lock?" he asked softly. Martin brought over the lock mechanism. Poirot examined it briefly, then reached into his coat for his magnifying glass. After a moment, he made a soft noise in his throat. "Dust," he said. "Dust," I echoed. "Fresh," Poirot explained. "On the inside of the fingerprint reader, which suggests it was recently cleaned, possibly to remove residue. But why would a thief clean a scanner after opening it?" "Ah," Poirot said, "perhaps because it was never opened at all." He stepped back and folded his arms. "This, Hastings, is not a theft in the usual sense. No brute force, no signature of panic. This was a performance, a deception." Greaves paled. "You think the violin was never in the case to begin with?" "No. I think it was taken, but not then. Someone removed it earlier before it was returned. Perhaps Maestro Altman believed he was returning the original, when in fact he was locking away a replica." "You think it was swapped?" I asked, incredulous. Poirot nodded. "Oui. Think, mon ami, who would benefit from such a scheme? Who would want to remove a violin not only of great value, but of symbolic meaning? Who might be desperate enough or ambitious enough to risk it?" Before we could continue, there was a sudden cry from the other side of the corridor. "Call someone!" a voice shouted. "He's bleeding!" Poirot and I turned sharply. A student had burst into the hall, her face pale. "It's Leo!" she gasped. "He's unconscious, in his dressing room." We followed at once, pushing through a narrow side door into a small, changing space lined with instrument cases and stage clothes. There, slumped beside a chair, lay Leo Varga, his head tilted against the wall, a thin trail of blood running from his temple. His violin case was open on the floor, empty. Poirot knelt beside him at once and checked his pulse. "Alive," he said quietly. "But barely. The blow was sharp and timed." Greaves, horrified, backed against the doorframe. "My God, this wasn't about the instrument." "No," Poirot said, rising slowly. "This, monsieur, was not a theft." He turned toward me, eyes dark with certainty. This was sabotage. Chapter 3. The Prodigy Falls. For a few terrible seconds the room held its breath. Leo Varga's small frame lay crumpled beside the vanity, his face pale as marble, save for the glistening smear of blood just above his brow. His eyes were closed, his lips parted, and his hands, those gifted, nimble hands, hung useless at his sides. Poirot, calm as always, motioned for the nearest student to fetch the nurse, then turned his attention fully to the boy. "No visible bruising aside from the head wound," he murmured. "No sign of defensive struggle. No shattered glass, no overturned furniture, just Leo and the silence." He pointed to a silver pitcher of water on the counter. "Still chilled. He must have collapsed not long before we arrived." "In the security cabinet backstage," Greaves replied. "We keep it under lock and key between rehearsals, with a biometric scanner and a mechanical combination. The case itself is custom, pressure-locked, humidity-controlled." "Dear heavens," I said. "Do you think it was deliberate, or a fall?" Poirot cast me a quick glance. "There is no sign of vertigo or accident. Hastings, the blow is too clean, too calculated." Poirot tapped his chin. "Most intriguing. Was the room locked?" I crouched beside Leo's violin case, which had fallen open just beside him. "It's empty," I confirmed grimly. Again. Twice in one morning, Poirot muttered. And yet I suspect the theft is merely camouflage. The nurse arrived and began tending to Leo with quiet urgency. As she dabbed the blood and checked his pupils, Poirot turned his gaze to the room itself. Dressing rooms, I must say, often reflect their occupant, and Leo's was no exception. Neatly folded handkerchiefs, a small stack of sheet music, annotated in a careful hand, a tin of rosin, a cloth for polishing strings. Everything was orderly, minimal, and intentional. Poirot examined the music stand and the mirror. Then he knelt to inspect the floor near Leo's feet. After a moment, he picked up a small, torn piece of fabric. "A thread," he said, "from wool, possibly the cuff of a jacket. Navy, I believe. And this... Ah!" He retrieved a fine silvery string from beneath the chair. It was thin, slightly frayed at one end. Poirot held it to the light. "A violin E-string," he said softly. "Snapped. Deliberately pulled, I think." He turned to the nurse. "Will he wake soon?" "Difficult to say," she replied. "His pulse is strong, but we'll want a doctor." Poirot nodded and rose, brushing dust from his knees. "Tell me, madame, how long since anyone entered this room?" "Stage staff checked the rooms around 7, she said. "He was due to rehearse again at 9. It's now just past 10. "Then this happened within the last hour," Poirot said, "and no one saw a soul enter." "Not unless they had access to the private corridor," the nurse added. "Only competitors, instructors, and approved staff are allowed backstage before the show, which narrows our suspects beautifully," Poirot said, adjusting his tie. "A crime born not of greed, but of ambition." I followed him into the hall, where Inspector Japp was just arriving, his coat unbuttoned and a look of reluctant interest on his face. "Poirot," he grunted, "they told me it was a violin, and now I hear there's a boy bleeding on the floor. Tell me this isn't another one of your melodramas." Poirot greeted him with polite warmth. "Ah, Japp, I believe we are in the presence of a particularly elegant crime, one that touches not only theft but sabotage and perhaps something more intimate." "I've seen theft before," Japp replied. "Smash, grab, flee. Same story since the Bronze Age. This looks like a jealous competitor trying to scare the boy off." "Then why?" Poirot asked. "Not simply frighten him. Why risk striking him unconscious and stealing a replica violin? Or perhaps," he added, lowering his voice, "someone wanted to eliminate Leo entirely, but hesitated at the last moment." Japp scowled. "You think someone meant to kill him?" Poirot shook his head. "No, that is not the scent of this affair. The boy is valuable, symbolically, musically, perhaps personally. But there is something else at play. Tell me, Japp, are there surveillance cameras in the dressing room hallway?" "Only at the stage doors," Japp said. "Budget cuts. We've got eyes on who enters the wing, but not on who enters each individual room." "Then we must speak to everyone who had access in the past 2 hours," Poirot said. "The instructors, the other competitors, the stage technician, even the cleaners. No one leaves until we've narrowed the field." Greaves, who had rejoined us, looked stricken. "This is a disaster. The press will be arriving within the hour." Poirot gave him a thin smile. "Let them arrive, monsieur, but until the truth is revealed, I suggest we postpone the competition." "Postpone?" Greaves echoed. "There is no violin," Poirot said gently. "No prodigy, no performance." And with that, he turned toward the auditorium, where the morning light was just beginning to stream through the stained glass windows. The stage was empty now, the chairs still arranged in elegant arcs, the music stands casting thin shadows like sundials. But the music had stopped, and Hercule Poirot, ever precise, would not rest until the harmony was restored. Chapter 4. The Circle of Rivals. The conservatoire's reception room had been transformed, no longer a place of polite applause and champagne, but of nervous glances, quiet murmurs, and the shuffling of polished shoes on parquet flooring. A handful of the competition's key figures stood in an uneasy semicircle, summoned at Poirot's request. "I thought we were meant to be preparing for rehearsal," muttered Julian Vance, arms crossed, jaw set in a smirk he wore like a badge. "Not starring in some crime drama." "You may return to your arpeggios once the matter is resolved," Poirot replied smoothly. "But until then, you will indulge me." Inspector Japp stood by the door, notebook open, occasionally grumbling, but taking notes nonetheless. Poirot, never one to waste a moment, began his inquiries with the ease of a conductor tapping his baton. We began with Yasmine Dupré, the French competitor, whose gaze could cut glass. Tall, severe, and wearing a scarf patterned in music notation, she exuded an air of permanent irritation. "Where were you between 8 and 10 this morning, mademoiselle?" Poirot asked. "In my practice room." "Alone," she replied, accent thick and crisp. "If I had known attending this event meant enduring interrogations like a criminal, I would have entered a different competition." "And what is your opinion of Monsieur Varga?" Yasmine narrowed her eyes. "A prodigy, yes, but too delicate. I have played since before he was born. I do not like being overlooked in favour of children." Poirot nodded. "And his talent?" "Unquestionable," she said. "But talent does not equal greatness. Passion, rage, makes great music." She said it with the kind of certainty only someone with something to prove could possess. Next came Sebastian Kroll, once a child star on the international circuit, now a man in his early 20s with a hint of faded fame clinging to his coat. "Leo?" he said, shrugging. "Good player, a little stiff, but that's the game, isn't it? You either evolve or you vanish." Poirot tilted his head. "And how are you evolving, monsieur?" Sebastian gave a brittle laugh. "By staying in the game. You don't think I noticed the judges barely looked at me, or that half the press photos are of Varga?" He shoved his hands in his pockets and rocked on his heels. "This competition is everything to me, but I didn't touch the kid, if that's what you're implying." Poirot did not reply, but his eyes lingered on a faint smudge on the cuff of Sebastian's sleeve. Julian Vance was next. He approached with a swagger that only sharpened under scrutiny. His jacket was freshly pressed, his cufflinks glinting beneath the chandeliers. "You have strong feelings about the Stradivarius, do you not, monsieur?" Poirot asked. "Of course I do," Julian replied smoothly. "It's the centerpiece, the trophy. Playing it means you've arrived." "And yet Monsieur Varga was chosen." Julian smiled thinly. "Well, he was the board's favourite, not mine." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And what were you doing this morning before rehearsal?" "Practicing," Julian said, "with my own violin. Unlike some, I don't need a museum piece to prove my skill." "But you do need an audience, yes?" Julian's expression cooled. "Look, detective, this isn't some village jewel heist. This is a pressure cooker. Everyone here wants to win. But you'll find that most of us are far too busy perfecting our technique to go knocking prodigies unconscious." Poirot nodded courteously. "Your honesty is appreciated." As Julian turned to leave, Poirot made a small, thoughtful sound, and then turned to Greaves. "I would like to speak with the staff next, specifically Maestro Altman, the technician Martin Peel, and anyone responsible for the movement or storage of the instruments." "I'll arrange it," Greaves said, already beginning to perspire. "But I must say, Poirot, this is not the sort of scandal we can afford." "Scandal is the child of secrecy, monsieur," Poirot said. "Best to expose it cleanly." We moved to the side hallway for a breath of quiet. Poirot stood beneath a high arched window, hands clasped behind his back. "Well?" I asked. "Any clear suspects?" Poirot's lips pursed. "Non, Hastings, not yet. But we are beginning to understand the orchestra, if not yet the score. Each of these young people plays a role, some more naturally than others." "You believe one of them did it?" "I believe that one of them knows more than they are telling. Leo Varga is not just a gifted performer. He is a threat, a symbol. And the Stradivarius, that instrument carries its own story. People do not steal such things without motive deeper than money." Just then, the nurse appeared around the corner, looking winded. "Mr. Poirot, Mr. Varga is awake." We followed her back through the marble corridors to the infirmary. Leo lay in a narrow cot, bandaged, pale, but alert. His hands trembled slightly as he pushed himself upright. His eyes widened when he saw Poirot. You're the detective," he said softly, his voice accented and strained. Poirot bowed. "Indeed, monsieur. And you are the victim, for now." Leo shook his head. I didn't see his face, but he wore a red scarf. That's all I remember. "A red scarf?" Poirot repeated. "Like the one worn by Mademoiselle Dupré?" Leo nodded faintly. "Maybe. I don't know. I didn't expect it. I heard the door open. Then something struck me. I couldn't even cry out." Poirot nodded. "You were attacked not to steal your violin, but to silence you. Someone feared what you might do on that stage." Leo looked down, his fingers clutching the thin blanket. "I think someone wanted me to fail." Poirot gave a thin smile. "Mais non, mon ami. I believe someone wanted you erased, and so we must ask, what truth do you carry that others fear to hear?" Chapter 5. The Legend of Del Cavali. Later that afternoon, Poirot and I found ourselves in the Conservatoire's Hall of Antiquities, a long vaulted gallery reserved for the institution's rarest musical treasures. Glass cases lined the walls, each housing artifacts of immeasurable cultural value, Baroque sheet music, lacquered bows, and the worn gloves of a famed 19th century conductor. But one case, set prominently near the center, now sat empty. The brass plaque beneath it read, "Antonio Stradivari, Cremona, 1712, the Del Cavali violin." Poirot examined the open case, his hands clasped neatly behind his back. "Look, Hastings, the silk cradle is untouched, not a crease out of place. A thief who removes a violin this delicately is either a lover of instruments or very practiced in deception." "I still say it's madness," I muttered. "You can't just carry off a violin like that without being seen. It's priceless." "Ah, but pricelessness, mon ami, is a mask. The true motive lies not in gold, but in meaning." He turned as Greaves entered, a slim leather folder tucked under one arm. "You asked for the Del Cavali records," he said, handing the folder to Poirot with visible reluctance. "I must admit, some of what's inside has never been released to the public." "Then let us discover if truth has been hiding in silence," Poirot replied, taking a seat on a nearby bench. He opened the folder carefully, revealing a stack of aging documents, provenance certificates, curator notes, faded clippings from old newspapers. One in particular caught his eye, a yellowed photograph of a man in opera attire, holding the violin like a weapon. "Giovanni del Cavali," Greaves said, "a composer, performer, and showman. He owned the instrument for nearly 30 years. Legend has it he commissioned it from Stradivari himself." Poirot nodded, scanning the photo. "He was murdered, was he not?" "Stabbed in the wings of La Scala, 1740. They say he died clutching the violin." I felt a chill. Greaves continued. "Over the next 2 centuries, the violin changed hands many times, always to virtuosos, always followed by some misfortune, illness, madness, broken careers." "Cursed," I said, half joking. Greaves didn't laugh. We don't use that word, but we do lock the instrument away between uses. Poirot returned to the documents. There is more, he said, pulling out a torn letter. This is curious. He read aloud. Can no longer bear the strain. It follows me even in sleep. The notes, the dream, the voice. I fear what the violin wants. I fear what it remembers. Greaves paled. That letter was found in the effects of Maestro Vincenzo Morelli. He played the Del Cavali in a recital just before... well, he disappeared. Disappeared? I echoed. Walked off stage during the applause, Greaves said. Never seen again. His coat and violin case were found on Westminster Bridge. Poirot's expression grew thoughtful. And yet the violin survived. Recovered weeks later in a pawn shop, Greaves nodded. Untouched, still tuned. Poirot fell silent, fingertips steepled. There is more here than history, he said softly. There is obsession, the kind that bleeds from generation to generation. And it is not the violin that carries the curse, it is the ambition of those who seek to possess it. Before I could reply, the sound of approaching footsteps broke the quiet. Maestro Altmann, Leo's instructor, entered with slow precision. His coat was immaculate, but his eyes were weary. You wish to speak with me, he said, his accent Central European, his voice as soft as a cello. Yes, Poirot replied, rising. About the moment you returned the Del Cavali to its case. Altmann nodded. It was just after 6. Leo had finished rehearsal. He was fatigued. I offered to secure the violin myself. You handled it personally? Of course. I cleaned the strings, wrapped it in the silk cloth, and set it in the pressure cradle. Then I closed the lid, keyed in the code, and placed my thumb on the scanner. The light turned green, locked. Poirot peered at him. And you noticed nothing unusual? No hesitation in the scanner? No flicker of hesitation in your own hand? Altmann hesitated. Perhaps. The strings felt warm. Warmer than expected, but I thought little of it. These instruments are unpredictable. And Leo? Poirot asked. Had he mentioned any threats? Any tension with the other competitors? Altmann's eyes darkened. He does not speak of such things. He plays. That is his world. I worry sometimes that it is the only world he knows. Poirot bowed slightly. Merci, Maestro. You have been most helpful. Altmann turned to leave, then paused. If I may, Monsieur Poirot, I do not believe this is about rivalry. Leo, he is gifted beyond reason. That breeds envy, yes, but this feels colder, older, like something waited for him. Poirot said nothing, only nodded. Once Altmann had gone, I turned to Poirot. You think he's right? That this isn't just about winning? Correct, Poirot said. The past has a long memory, Hastings, and we are dealing not with a mere crime, but a performance, one that began long ago with Giovanni del Cavali and is only now reaching its final act. He turned back to the empty case, and for a moment it seemed the whole room listened to its silence. Come, Poirot said, buttoning his coat. The violin has vanished, but it is still speaking, and someone in this building understands its voice. Chapter 6. The Musician's Mask. That evening, the conservatoire dimmed into a hush. What was meant to be a night of rehearsals and anticipation had instead become a theatre of unease. The final round of the competition had been postponed, the judges had retired early to the lounge, and the students, those not confined to questioning, had scattered, their melodies silenced for the night. Poirot and I remained in the faculty wing, seated in a modest conference room made austere by an over-polished table and a tea tray untouched since morning. Inspector Japp slouched by the window, flipping through his notes with mounting frustration. Still no solid leads, Japp muttered. Half the kids have alibis, the other half have egos, and no one saw the violin leave the building. Poirot tapped a finger on the table. That is precisely what interests me, mon cher Japp, the absence of sight in a building made to showcase performance. I frowned. You mean it disappeared in plain sight? Exactly, Hastings. We've been asking the wrong question. Not who stole the violin, but how it vanished so invisibly. He stood, moving toward the wide corkboard where names, notes and photos were now pinned. In the centre, a printout of the Del Cavali violin, glowing under glass. Poirot pointed. Everyone saw the violin in rehearsal, but was it truly the original? I blinked. You think someone swapped it before the theft? Oui. And more so, I believe the theft itself was staged to distract from something more intimate. His finger moved next to Leo Varga's photograph. Our young prodigy was attacked not for a violin, but for what he knew. Japp leaned back, unimpressed. Then what did he know? That, Poirot said, we must deduce. But first, I believe it is time we speak again with the technician, Martin Peel. He has remained oddly peripheral, and yet he is the only one who touches everything. Peel was summoned promptly. The man entered sheepishly, his frame hunched, his glasses fogged slightly, as though he had come from the humidity-controlled vaults. He clutched a clipboard like a shield. Monsieur Peel, Poirot said, smiling. We are grateful for your time. I have only one question to begin. Tell me, when did you last examine the Del Cavali's pressure case before the day of the theft? Peel swallowed. The night before rehearsal. I always check it after the final cleaning. And did you notice anything amiss? He hesitated. No, though. I suppose the hinges felt stiff, and there was a faint scratch on the locking ring. A scratch? Poirot leaned forward. Did you report this? I didn't think it mattered. Could have been from where. That case is older than it looks. Indeed, Poirot said. Older things often have secrets. He took a slow step forward. Tell me, monsieur, have you ever tuned a fake? Peel blinked. What? Poirot folded his arms. A replica, a forgery. Something nearly perfect to the eye but hollow to the ear. If someone swapped the Del Cavali with a false twin, they'd need to dull its resonance. A technician could manage that. I would never... Peel burst out, then flushed. I mean, I wouldn't do that. Not to an artifact like that. But someone might, Poirot said quietly. And they might use you to do it indirectly. A minor repair order here, a tuning request there. Peel hesitated. Well, there was a luthier's invoice last week. Someone wanted a hairline crack addressed on the Del Cavali. Who requested it? Peel looked pale. It wasn't signed. It came through the internal system. The note said to deliver it quietly to the East workroom. I assumed it was Maestro Altmann or the director. Poirot turned to Japp. Check the timestamp on that repair order, and if possible, locate the delivery records for the case's movement that night. Peel left the room, looking rather like a student caught copying from the wrong sonata. Once we were alone again, Poirot rubbed his chin. We're getting closer. Someone used the machinery of the institution, its rules, its habits, to orchestrate their own movement. Like a musician using a score, I offered. Just so, Hastings, he smiled. And speaking of musicians, it is time we revisit Julian Vance. That night, we found Vance in the lower practice hall, its high ceilings echoing softly with the final notes of a solo. He stood before a mirror, shirt unbuttoned, bow in hand, practicing slow strokes with exaggerated flair. Ah, he said when he saw us. The law arrives. Poirot bowed. Forgive the interruption, monsieur, but I have one curiosity. Only one? Poirot ignored him. The red scarf. We heard mention of it. Leo Varga described his attacker as wearing one. Julian raised an eyebrow. I don't own one. Yasmin does. 2, I think. I see, Poirot said. But you were seen wearing a red kerchief around your arm during your last solo recital. Julian's smirk faded. That wasn't a scarf, it was for grip. I get sweaty when I play. Perhaps, Poirot murmured. And yet, he stepped forward. Let me ask you something. Why are you here tonight, Julian? The rehearsal was cancelled, the stage closed, and yet you practice, alone, in a forgotten room. Vance met his eyes coolly. Because I need this. Unlike Leo, I wasn't born with a magic wand. I worked for it. Every bloody scale. Poirot nodded. Thank you, monsieur. That is all, for now. We exited quietly. As the doors shut behind us, Poirot turned to me. He did not lie, he said softly, but he did rehearse the truth. And Hastings, we must listen to rehearsed truths carefully, for they are written with intent. Outside, the wind had begun to stir. The lights in the main auditorium flickered behind stained glass, and somewhere in that echoing building a false note still rang. Chapter 7, The Prodigy's Secret. The morning dawned grey and sharp, with a drizzle misting over the conservatoire's iron gates. Inside, the corridors hummed with a tense silence. The competition remained suspended. The press had caught wind of the Stradivarius scandal, and uniformed officers now guarded both wings of the performance hall. Yet the real storm, I knew, was forming behind Poirot's furrowed brow. We found Leo Varga in the infirmary, sitting upright with a blanket over his lap. His hair was damp from a sponge bath, but his eyes, those clear, focused eyes, had lost none of their brilliance. "You look better?" I offered. "I feel like a cracked bridge," Leo muttered, touching his bandage. Poirot stepped forward. "Then we shall not waste your strength. I have only a few questions, but they are important." "Very important, monsieur." Leo nodded solemnly. "You told us someone struck you," Poirot began, "and that they wore a red scarf." Leo hesitated. "Yes, but now I'm not sure. I saw it flash red, but it could have been a sleeve or something else. I wasn't thinking clearly." "Understandable," Poirot said kindly. "And tell me, did you ever see the real Del Cavali up close?" Leo blinked. "Of course, I played it." "Yes, but did you examine it? Did you ever suspect it was not the original?" At that, Leo looked down, troubled. I wasn't sure. The tone was strange, brighter, almost tinny. I thought maybe I was playing too hard. Maestro Altman insisted it was authentic. But you doubted?" Yes, a little." Poirot nodded, gently now. "Tell me, Leo, when did the music start to change for you?" He frowned. "About 2 weeks ago. I began waking in the night, hearing notes in my head. Not my music, something else, something old." "You mentioned a dream." Leo glanced at me, then back to Poirot. I dreamt I was on stage, but I wasn't playing. I was being played." My fingers moved, but not from me. There was a figure behind me in a red cloak guiding my arms. Poirot listened without interruption. "The audience," Leo whispered, "was full of shadows. I played the final note and they didn't clap. They just stood like statues. Then I woke up." Silence followed. Poirot knelt beside the cot. "Mon ami," he said softly, "what you describe, it is not madness, it is memory." "Yours or someone else's?" Leo stared at him. "The violin you held was not merely a violin, it was a mirror. Someone knew what that mirror could reveal, and they feared what you might see." Poirot rose. "You must rest now, but remember, the mind forgets details, but the soul remembers music. That will be your key." As we stepped into the hall, I turned to Poirot. "You think the violin triggered something in him?" "Mais oui," he nodded. "A resonance. Leo is more than a prodigy. He is a sensitive, a vessel, and someone close to this competition feared he would uncover a buried truth." "You mean the violin was a message?" "Precisely," Poirot said, "and someone attempted to intercept it." We returned to the gallery, where Greaves met us in a state of high alarm. "The inventory," he said, waving a clipboard. We rechecked the archives. "There's something you need to see." He led us to the instrument archives, a vast, dim space beneath the conservatoire, filled with towering cabinets and locked drawers. Inside one narrow locker, Greaves produced a velvet-wrapped object. He unwrapped it slowly. "A replica," he said. "Identical to the Del Cavali, same build, same varnish, but the maker's mark inside the body is modern." Poirot peered inside the F-hole, then gave a low whistle. "Gustav Meyer," he said. "German luthier, very skilled, dead 3 years." He turned to Greaves. "Who commissioned this?" Greaves shook his head. "It isn't logged." Poirot held the violin up to the light. "And yet here it is, hidden among the forgotten, but not forgotten by its owner." Japp entered just then, panting. "We traced the workshop request," he said. "The repair order?" "It was submitted under Julian Vance's login, but it originated from the stage manager's office." "Interesting," Poirot murmured. "Julian's name, but not his hand." Japp nodded. "And more, Martin Peel said someone tampered with the biometric scanner last week. The dust Poirot found, that came from graphite powder, used to confuse scanners." "So someone bypassed the lock," I said. And now we know how." Poirot stood still for a long moment, gazing at the replica. "We are close, mon ami," he said at last. "The mask is beginning to slip. One of our performers wears it well, but the final act is coming." "Then what now?" I asked. "We let the curtain rise," he said, "and we invite our suspects to a private recital." Chapter 8. The Recital of Lies. It was just past 6 in the evening when the summons was delivered. A private recital to be held in the East Hall, attendance strictly limited to competition finalists, instructors, and select faculty. Officially, it was billed as a morale-boosting event. Unofficially, it was a stage set for revelation. Poirot, ever theatrical when it suited him, stood at the edge of the small platform adjusting the folds of his pocket square. Let the truth arrive in rhythm, Hastings? One measure at a time. The East Hall, though smaller than the Grand Auditorium, was exquisitely designed. Acoustic panels along the high walls, polished wood floors that shimmered under amber sconces, and a modest dais with only one chair and a music stand. Each guest was escorted in by Inspector Japp, who took a post by the exit. Present were Yasmin Dupré, arms folded, jaw clenched; Julian Vance, his expression unreadable behind a veneer of casual charm; Sebastian Kroll, fiddling with his tie; Maestro Altman, ever composed; Martin Peel, sweating through his collar; and Greaves, twitchy as ever. Leo Varga, still recovering, was absent by Poirot's orders. As the room settled into silence, Poirot stepped forward. "Mes amis," he began, "tonight there will be no judging, no scoring, no applause. Only one performance remains. The truth." A ripple passed through the room. Yasmin rolled her eyes. Sebastian looked vaguely amused. "But Julian—" Julian leaned forward just a fraction. Poirot gestured to the centre of the dais. "Here we have a replica violin, near perfect in craft, indistinguishable at a glance. It was discovered in the archives, hidden." Julian's smirk faltered. "This replica," Poirot continued, "was substituted for the real Del Cavali some days ago. The original has not been seen since. The rehearsal violin, the one Leo played, was not the Stradivarius." Gasps rippled across the room. Yasmin sat upright. "That's not possible. I heard him play. It was—" "Extraordinary," Poirot said. "Yes, but not because of the violin, because of him. And that, mes amis, is the heart of the matter." He turned to the group. "Let us walk backward, shall we? The replica was placed in the pressure case. The original vanished without alarm. The biometric scanner was dusted with graphite to bypass its memory. The access request was falsified using Julian Vance's login, but submitted from the stage manager's office, an area only accessible by staff." All eyes turned to Martin Peel. "I assumed the request was valid." Poirot raised a hand. "We do not accuse you, monsieur. We say only this. Someone used your access and your routine to orchestrate a disappearance." He pointed now to the guests one by one. Yasmin Dupré, who felt overlooked. Sebastian Kroll, the former star whose light has dimmed. Julian Vance, the careerist, always one note from fury. All had motive, all had opportunity, but only one played a different score. Poirot paused, then turned. "Julian Vance," he said, "you commissioned the replica, did you not?" Julian blinked slowly. "No." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "You didn't need to. Your father did?" Julian's composure cracked. Greaves stood abruptly. "What are you talking about?" Poirot turned to him. "The donors' fund for the instrument's restoration, the discretionary spending buried in the Conservatoire's accounts, the anonymously sponsored Luthier Commission, all traced back to you, Mr. Greaves." Greaves turned pale. Poirot continued. "You planned the switch long ago. The replica was perfect. You intended to replace the violin after the competition, sell the real Del Cavali through private channels, and retire, hands clean. But then Leo Varga played it." Greaves swallowed hard. "He heard something," Poirot said softly. "The violin's true voice. And that frightened you. So you staged a second theft, this time violent, chaotic. You struck Leo, you planted the red scarf to mislead, and you reclaimed the replica before anyone noticed the switch." Greaves shook his head. "No one can prove that." Poirot turned to Japp, who opened the door. A constable entered with a sealed evidence bag. Inside, the real Del Cavali violin. "We found it in Mr. Greaves's storage unit," Japp said, "tucked beneath a blanket of sheet music and antique programs." Gasps echoed. Greaves sagged into his chair. Julian stood. You used my name, my login, my reputation." Poirot gave a quiet nod to Japp. The inspector moved swiftly, handcuffs glinting. Greaves said nothing more. Poirot stepped forward, adjusting his cuffs. The violin returns to its case, the stage to silence. As the constable led Greaves away, Poirot turned to the room. "There is no curse upon the Del Cavali," he said. "Only those who believe greatness can be stolen." And with that he bowed, modestly, precisely, as the last lie unravelled in the fading light. Chapter 9. The Encore of Regret. The day after the recital, the London skies broke into soft sunlight, a brief reprieve after days of rain and suspicion. The Conservatoire, shaken but still standing, carried on as institutions often do, its halls cleaner, its locks changed, and its ghosts quietly swept back into the shadows. Poirot, however, remained a figure of composed unrest. We sat that morning in the director's study, where a full tea service had been laid out, untouched. Poirot stood at the window with his hands behind his back, watching the students move across the courtyard below. violin cases on their backs like soldiers with rifles, eager, brilliant, unaware of the scandal that had played out above their heads. "You've returned the violin to its rightful place?" he asked, not turning. "Yes," said Greaves's replacement, a nervous young administrator named Collins. "The real Del Cavali is secured under full supervision now. The board has also issued a statement. They're calling it an isolated incident." Poirot gave a small sigh. The English fondness for understatement. He finally turned. "And young Monsieur Varga?" "Still resting, but the doctors say he'll make a full recovery." Poirot nodded. "Bon, there is something I must do before we leave." We descended once more to the infirmary. Leo was awake, propped up against a stack of pillows. He offered a tired but genuine smile when he saw Poirot. "You found it, didn't you?" he asked. Poirot nodded. "Yes, the violin has been recovered." Leo let out a breath. "I knew it. I knew something was wrong when I played it. I could feel it, like it wanted to be found." Poirot sat beside him. "Sometimes music is a language of the subconscious, mon ami. We do not play it, it plays us." Leo was quiet for a moment, then looked away. "Will I be allowed to compete again?" "That depends," Poirot said. "Not on your talent, but on your courage." Leo frowned slightly. "The stage does not forgive," Poirot said gently. "It magnifies. What you do with your gift, how you protect it, will decide everything." Leo nodded slowly, eyes shadowed with thought. "I wanted to win," he said. "But now I think I just want to play again." Poirot rose and gave a slight bow. As we left the infirmary, Hastings glanced back at the young prodigy. "Do you think he'll be all right, Poirot?" Poirot's brow furrowed. "In time. But greatness always extracts a price. Let us hope he pays with humility and not with pain." The final concert of the Conservatoire resumed that evening, stripped of competition, refashioned as a tribute. It was held in the grand hall, candlelit and reverent, with every seat filled and the audience hushed. No trophies, no judges, only music. And in the second half of the programme, the recovered Del Cavali made its return, not in the hands of a performer, but resting on a velvet-draped pedestal under soft, golden light, a symbol not of victory, but of survival. Poirot sat beside me in the front row, watching with a quiet intensity. As the final movement swelled to a close, a Mahler adagio performed by the full student orchestra, the audience rose in silence before offering a slow, measured applause. Poirot did not clap. He turned to me instead. "You see, Hastings," he murmured, "the true power of music is not in its perfection. It is in its truth, and the truth once played cannot be silenced." He stood, straightened his cuffs, and smiled faintly. "Come, let us leave before someone tries to hand me a violin." Chapter 10. The Final Bow. Our final day in London was unremarkable in weather, but weighted with the quiet finality that follows a great performance. The newspapers had begun to trickle out cautious headlines. "Stolen Stradivarius, recovered in shocking music school scheme. Detective Poirot solves violin mystery." And my personal favourite, "Theft in 3/4 time." A pun Poirot found très gauche. We took our leave of the Conservatoire mid-morning, suitcases packed, collars stiffened, and the air brisk with the chill of an English spring not yet in bloom. Poirot, as always, walked with an impeccable calm, though I sensed the wheels of thought still turned beneath his polished exterior. On the platform at Paddington Station, we stood waiting for our train when a voice called out behind us. It was Maestro Altmann, striding up in his long coat, breathless but dignified. "I had to thank you, and I wanted to ask, how did you know about Greaves?" Poirot smiled modestly. "Ah, monsieur, it was a matter of symmetry. The theft was too clean, too practiced. It bore the marks of someone who understood the institution from the inside. And then there were the finances, the commissions, the codes, the pressure case bypassed with technician-level knowledge. It all pointed to someone not merely inside the building, but embedded in its rhythm. Altman nodded. And Julian? He will recover, Poirot said. But I suspect this will temper his pride. Altman allowed a small smile. Good. He has always had more brilliance than discipline. And Leo? Poirot asked softly. Altman hesitated, then said, I believe he will find his own way now. He understands that being gifted is not the same as being ready. Poirot inclined his head. A fine distinction, and a rare one. As the whistle blew, Altman offered his hand. Poirot shook it graciously, and then we boarded. Inside the carriage, Poirot finally allowed himself to relax. He set his gloves beside him, smoothed his moustache, and looked out the window as the train began to glide forward. I must admit, Poirot, I said, this wasn't the most dangerous case we've faced, but certainly one of the most delicate. Ah, Hastings, he replied. Murder and theft are blunt instruments, but ambition? Ambition is the violin. It requires tuning, restraint, and the precise pressure of the bow. It can make an angel weep or shatter glass. He fell silent for a moment. The Del Cavali was not merely valuable, mon ami, it was desired, and in the end, that was the motive, more than money, more than fame. He glanced at me. Desire is a complicated melody. Sometimes it plays the truth. More often, it plays only echoes. As the train carried us farther from the city, I watched Poirot close his eyes, lulled not by the motion of the carriage, but perhaps, at last, by the soft silence of a case concluded. Outside, the world moved on, but within, I knew, he was still listening for the next note. And so another mystery finds its resolution, not in thunder, but in a single, well-played note. Thank you for joining us on this Poirot story, The Vanishing Violin. If you enjoyed this elegant unraveling of clues, consider subscribing for more tales inspired by the timeless detective himself. Until next time, keep your bow steady, your mind sharper, and your little grey cells ever ready